It's a small town jukebox rock and roll. Yeah, like Coltrane playing when it hits your soul. Get the whole thing shaking when we hit the floor. Yeah, we're just getting started. Let's see where it goes. Harder than the summer. Harder than the summer. Feeling the heat. We got everybody burning at 100 degrees. Harder than the summer. You know what I mean. It's that old school drop top, won't let you down. It's that hush, hush, here it comes, talk of the town. Make your head stand up and your chin hit the ground. Get you all fired up, keep working it out. Harder than the summer. Harder than the summer. Feeling the heat. We got everybody burning at 100 degrees. Harder than the summer. You know what I mean. Harder than the summer and I'm feeling the heat. Harder than the summer and you know what I mean. Harder than the summer and I'm feeling the heat. Harder than the summer. Harder than the summer. Harder than the summer. Harder than the summer. Feeling the heat. We got everybody burning at 100 degrees. Harder than the summer. You know what I mean. Harder than the summer and I'm feeling the heat. Harder than the summer and I'm feeling the heat. We got
Exactly.
Hey, thank you for tuning in. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are tuning in to the Speedsters live chat. Welcome. I'm very happy to have you here with us. Every Saturday at this time, we go live for a long form interview. The interview will take about 45 to 60 minutes with someone in the cycling industry that I have always wanted to talk to. And today, we are going to be talking to Ed Collins from Notio Konekt, the makers of this aerodynamic sensor that is really, really cool. You probably have seen it on social media and whatnot. So today we will bring to you the VP of Sales and Marketing of Notio, Ed Collins, and we'll be talking together. Can aerodynamics gain be pursued by everyone? Is it for Olympic cyclists? Is it for the world champions only? Or can we, as normal people, find aerodynamics gains as well in our own cycling? So without much further ado, we want to bring on Ed to our discussion. Hey Ed, how's it going?
Very well, Lewis. Good morning. How are you?
I am good. It is sunny and hot over here. What's the weather like in UK?
Well, unfortunately it's grey and rainy where I am in the UK. So yeah, it's not a day for the bike, unfortunately, for me. Maybe for people who are a bit more enthusiastic. But
sounds
yeah,
like
great to be on. Thank you.
You're most welcome. We are very honored to have you here. Sounds like a typical British day, British weather. Now, we want to talk to you about Notio Konekt, what it is all about. And in the course of preparing for this interview, I scoured the internet and the social media a little bit, and just to check out who are the people using Notio Konekt. And I just want to bring it right up here. So we have Alistair Brownlee, who is the double Olympic gold medalist in 2012, 2016 in triathlon. And then we have...
Yeah, I think Alistair's picture there was pre-Kona and the 70.3 World Championships last year, interestingly.
And then we have Sebastian Kinley,
Yep.
who is also using your product here. again, he's Ironman world champion. And we have, of course, the famous Huub Wattbike guys also using your sensors. And of course, the Danish team, the Danish team pursuit team that broke the world record 3 times in 2 days at the recent World Championship. So talk to us about what is Notio Konekt and how can we expect it to benefit people?
Sure. So, I mean, I'll start by giving maybe the viewers and listeners a bit of background because, it's a bit, how did we get to creating this device? But Notio as a company, we're based in Montreal in Canada, and we're owned by Argon 18, the sort of top end bike manufacturer. So Argon 18 had a vision. A few years ago now to try and find, they always knew when they were looking for that sort of ultimate fast bike that, the rider has obviously got a big impact as to, how you overcome aerodynamic drag. So the bicycle is fixed, obviously. You can make some changes to the frame design, the handlebars, and we're still seeing lots of innovation today. But the one area that's quite difficult is how do you actually measure somebody sitting on the bike and what effect does that have on the drag? So the idea was initially to put the sensors inside the bike, and that's for those people who know anything about frame building and all that kind of stuff, it's inherently quite difficult to do. So we went to Eurobike and said, hey, this is our concept bike, and people go, wow, if you can produce that would be great. But then roll forward a further 12 months, 2017, we decided to try and take the technology out and put it inside, the unit, like a much larger unit than what we have today. But, rolling forward, the idea was to try and take that difficult, I suppose, challenge of trying to measure what the rider and, I suppose the rider and bike drag is. And a lot of people were doing this already by going to a wind tunnel, by going on a track and doing very specific tests. But there was, very few people doing stuff, outside. Yes, you've got various sort of manual methods that you can use to try and calculate, but you almost need a science team behind you to go and actually do that. So what we did was we said, okay, how can we, what are the key parameters that we need to make this work? So the first thing is with our device, it needs to be very, very compact and light and easily transferable from bike to bike. So if you change bikes, you can move it and all that kind of stuff. So that was challenge number one. The second thing was, the system, the recording inside the system, we're recording at 4 times a second, which is, another challenge, right? So the technology that you have to put inside, the PCB, electronics, the battery, all that kind of stuff, all has to be put inside a unit. So the engineering and, if you like, the technology challenge was actually not insignificant. And in our sort of loads of different designs, we were thinking, we'd like to have more sensors on the bike. We'd like to have all these things to try and think, okay, we're going to collect as much information we can. But you have to be practical in the sense that you want to be able to put it on the bike easily. You want to be able to connect it with sensors. So then we started to build the connectivity so it connects via AN+. So
Ed, why don't you can you tell us what does the sensor do? I mean, it's a device. So you have gyroscope, you have you can read wind speed, all kind of stuff. Maybe you can walk us through what do you have built inside this device? Okay.
So in a sense, what we've got is a series of, as you say, sensors, starting with the pitot tube at the front of the device. So that's a, high quality, sort of the kind of thing that you might, it's not exactly the same thing because obviously ours is smaller, but a pitot tube is obviously used to measure wind speed on the front of an aeroplane or, other devices that you might use. So we start with that. Then inside you've got obviously, gyroscope. So we do X and Y axis. So we can tell when the bike is leaning. We can tell, when the bike is actually going up a grade and all that kind of stuff. It's got an accelerometer. So we can tell when somebody's accelerating. And then obviously it's got a Bluetooth and plus sensor, so it can communicate because it doesn't have a screen. So communicating to a phone, iPhone, it will be able to, you'll be able to use the software that we supply that will allow you to communicate with the device. And then and plus is required to communicate with the devices on your bike, because to calculate the drag, we need a speed sensor. We're not using GPS speed because of the accuracy. And the second thing then is we need a power meter. And that's in essence what you've got on the device. And originally what we did was the Notio was branded Notio Konect, and that's what you have. We've recently just focused on Notio just as a branding thing, but originally we were trying to connect all these things together, which is actually quite difficult. And our main focus right now is saying to somebody, okay, you put this device on your bike, you can test and measure what drag, or CDA as some people call it in the real world outside, and then you can get a measurement. And I think it's the ultimate aim for us is to try and as you said at the beginning, Lewis, is that this type of measurement has always been only available national federations, riders on teams. You go to wind tunnel or you go to the velodrome and do testing, and we're trying to take that experience and bring it to a lot more people and make it more affordable. And obviously, with our device, you're able to obviously have it with you all the time.
Yes.
And two use cases. One is I want to test equipment, and manufacturers make claims on their products and stuff like that, helmets, wheels, skin suits, etc. And sometimes, and through no fault of the manufacturing process, when you put a helmet and a skin suit on rider A and rider B, you might get differing results in terms of drag, and that's nothing to do with the manufacturing.
Exactly.
It's to do with how it fits on the rider.
Yeah, helmet is a very personal thing.
It's very personal, yeah. And even combinations of those two things are really, really important. So if you look at the Danish team who broke the team pursuit record, the helmet choice, it's for a reason. It fits and it works
for them.
And for them, absolutely, yeah. So I think there's those types of things. But then if you're just a TT rider or a triathlete and you're trying to improve performance, sometimes you're thinking, oh, I'm going to get that helmet because everybody says it's fast. But actually, you don't really know because, you put it on. Yes, it might fit, and that's all great. But what we bring is the ability to measure and give you a number. And I would just make the comparison. It's no different to somebody embarking on a training program. If I'm a coach also, and when I work with athletes, I want to know what I'm working with. Where's the baseline? And then more importantly, if they're competing in an event, I will train them to sort of work towards the demands of that event. And in the case of, a time trial and a triathlon, obviously having some efficiency and some aerodynamic advantage is now becoming, more and more important.
Precisely. For the benefit of our viewers, I would like to share with you some pictures of testing, because our team has got a couple of these aero sensors, and we have gone out and do some testing, and just to walk you through our personal experience using them, so you have an idea what we deal with here. So the sensor is mounted in the front end of the bicycle. For us, we mount it right underneath our cycling computer unit. This mount here is typically like a GoPro kind of mounting. You can mount a GoPro camera underneath here as well. So that's what we do. And then we have that's the mobile app that Ed was talking about. There's a mobile app that we use for calibration of the aerodynamic sensors. And when we link it to our Garmin head unit, we can see the CDA and the wind speed of the day. Some of the information that we can get. And after we finish our ride, we can hang on for a sec. Okay. All right. So then we head up for a ride, and you can see that the head unit is mounted here, And after we finish a ride, we can come back to the computer, download the data from the Notio Konect to the computer, and we can get some interesting reading, including vibration, air density, humidity, that sort of reading. All that is recorded into the unit. So this tiny little thing here is more than just an aerodynamic sensors. It picks up humidity, temperature, vibration, how much does the bike vibrate on the surface, all that. So it's actually quite surprising that so much can be packed into a very tiny package, Ed.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, as I said earlier, we started, in the bike, taking it out, putting it into the plastic and developing it to get to that shape that we have right now. And obviously it's the big advantage, of course, is that you can just unclip it, take it off your bike, put it on when you need to put it on and stuff like that. So it's just a neat way of doing it. And obviously it's got, we've got the potential to do more, but right now we want to focus on saying to people, okay, aero for everyone, you can put it on your bike, you can go test, you can get the numbers that as we were saying earlier, the ones that are, really the sort of typically have been available to people who are, going to wind tunnel, velodrome, that kind of thing. So
yeah. So Ed, I would like to ask this. Why does your product keep showing up in people who sets world record or world champion in triathlon, Olympic gold medalists and all that? Is your product only for them? What's your take, Ed?
No. So originally when we started, when we first launched the product, we decided that we wanted to try and work with those riders, teams, and so on. And then last September, and in the run up to December, we made the product available to everybody, and we've got distributors and obviously a website where you can get the product. So now it's available to everyone, but we wanted to go through that process because and we're still working with those riders and federations and teams because we learn a lot, right?
Yes.
So we're already now advancing around what we do for testing. Let's say some of the riders that are working on the velodrome, we've got some new things, and more importantly, we've been doing it quite a long time, and we've learned lots. And the other thing is that we spend a lot of time trying to build, in terms of the software, we've learned a lot about what really works for end users, and we're still not there. It'll be a constant, evolution, like
Yes.
anything else we have, right? So, we're not using the same telephone we used 10 years ago,
You were saying that the aerodynamic sensors that we are seeing today is you are comparing this to the early days of using a power meter. In early days when power meter was rolled out, people have to go to only certain universities, certain lab has the SRM power meter, and it is not on every bike. But 20 years later, down the road, now we see power meters all over the world, in amateurs all the way to professionals. Do you see that this is the similar kind of development, that we are in the very early stage of aerodynamics measuring, and it's going to develop into something like a power meter?
We believe so, and the reason for that is that when you see the improvements that people can get from adapting to a new position or being able to hold a position, more importantly. So then because if we put coaches' hats on a second, right? So you and I know, Lewis, if I work with a rider, I can eke out 10%, maybe 5%, and as we get fitter and fitter over time, the return and the gains on some of that training is sort of gets less and less.
Yes.
You still combine things, but and then the next thing, of course, is if you're competing in a time trial, you're competing in a triathlon, then you're thinking, oh, everybody's starting to look at this stuff. They're changing equipment. Equipment doesn't stay the same. It's always manufacturers are developing new things.
Yes.
But how do you quantify the aero? And I think when you look at some of the gains, because when you look at the objective here, right? We want to try and improve the speed and the time it takes to get from point A to point B.
Yes.
And that's not necessarily always about who puts out the most power. It's
Precisely.
about who is the most efficient.
Yes.
So if I'm an Ironman triathlete and I start off in the first 50 miles, and let's say take Kona out to the turn point, and I'm going really, really well. It's a bit hot. I'm not feeling, I've still got to run a marathon at the end of this. Efficiency is the key, but also efficiency and being aerodynamic, because you want to get and do your bike leg, still run, but have the efficiency afterwards. And by quantifying the aerodynamic piece, and more importantly, if you were to use this in training, you can start to see, okay, there's my first sector, 25, 50 miles or X kilometers. Is my efficiency and my CDA really good there? And then it gets really bad towards the end because I'm starting to get tired.
Yeah.
So you have to then improve that.
Let me hold you right there. Okay, let's bring it down to a very, very simple discussion. The idea of using an aerodynamic sensor is to reduce our drag, because if we want to go faster, either we come up with higher power, okay, same position, higher power, or we go, hopefully we can reduce the drag and go faster by a reduced drag. Now, can you tell us, by reducing the drag by say 5 to 10%, what sort of gains do we see in terms of watts? Ed?
Well, watts is normally a little bit difficult to sort of quantify exactly, but typically, if you're talking about, I don't know, I'm just roughly taking it, but even a 5% decrease in CDA, which isn't that difficult to do, and if provided you conform to that, on a 20, 30K distance, or say 30 minutes of riding roughly, you could be eking out 10, 15 seconds of gain, and that's just 5% change. So you go and do 10% change in your CDA, then it's exponential. And the other thing that's important as well is that, of course, what you've got to remember is when you go faster, the resistance goes up, and that's the other bit that people tend to forget about, is that when you race, you typically race at in a triathlon or a TT, 35, 40, 50 Ks an hour, right?
Yes.
So, then the gains become even bigger, because if you're reducing that by 10%, you could be looking at a minute, 2 minutes. And for some people in that's PB territory. That's having and again, remember what we said a second ago, it's about efficiency. So if you've improved your efficiency, and in the case of a triathlete, as an example, you might be using less fuel. You're not having to sort of fuel up as much and all that kind of stuff. So the gains are exponential against the speed, and then as you said, it depends on the event, it depends on the distance, it depends on the conditions, obviously. But there is, you're talking in some cases, depending on the rider, minutes that they can gain just by making it position change. By the way, we're not talking about expensive helmets, skin suits, or anything like that, because the shape of the body is really, really
the biggest.
It's really important. And seeing recently in the last 12, 18 months, 2 years, we're seeing certainly in the UK this praying mantis position, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's fast for everybody. And people have gone to it and gone, "Oh, I'm going to be really fast. I'm going to get this gain," and realize, why is that not happening for me when my friend or my competitor I race with is like just blowing it out of the water? They don't really know, because they're just estimating or thinking that that's the case. You have to, as I say, testing is obviously the only way that you can determine what that is.
Without a scientific product for testing, it's just guesswork, right? And since we talk about guesswork, how accurate is your sensor? Have you put it to test versus wind tunnel or other testing method? The gold standard. The gold standard today would be what? Wind tunnel.
Wind tunnel, and obviously, typically what people will say in the aerodynamics field, if you like, and I'm not an aerodynamicist, I'm a coach, and obviously, I've worked in technology for a long time. But what I see and what they say is that, ideally you need to have several sensors on the bike. And as I said earlier, how practical is that? Would you like your $15,000 TT bike adorned with all these sensors?
Yeah.
Most people will say no. So that was the first challenge. How can we put the pitot tube into the small device that we have to make it, as you say, portable and all that kind of stuff? Then the second thing, as you say, is how accurate is it? So the pitot tube that we have on the bike, we have tested against gold standard pitot in the wind tunnel to check, okay, are we getting the same reading? And the answer is yes. And there's some papers that will sort of corroborate that that people have done independent of our own testing. Then the second thing, more importantly, is okay. There's some you've got a power meter, you've got a speed sensor. So obviously you've got to make sure that we don't recommend that you use left side only power. We make sure it's got to be dual sided and stuff like that. But even in our software, when you're doing analysis, we will still, and we have seen power meters that drift, power meters that are not recording correctly, because of course we were able to analyze that using our software. But to answer your question, yes, we've done the tests. And yes, there are some limitations with our device. We're not suggesting that you can go out in super windy conditions. You can't sprint ridiculously hard when you're doing a test and stuff like that. It's got limitations, of course, but no different if you were doing an FTP test. You wouldn't necessarily go outside and try and use a tailwind or whatever it might be. You try and make the sort of environment as repeatable as you possibly can outside.
Yes.
So, and then the other important thing is, I guess when we talk earlier about the power meter sort of process, if you like, we have put a lot of effort into trying to build tools in the software that will pick out where these anomalies might happen. So, for instance, when you're doing a test with the device, if you've had issues with regards to wind gusts or whatever it might be, the software is clever enough to say, hey, I don't think that data is 100% correct. I'm not going to suggest that that's an accurate test.
Yeah.
So we've actually worked, we're very fortunate in Montreal where we've got access to, it's a center for artificial intelligence. So where a lot of the very large companies in the world, Facebook, Google, etc., have a load of researchers around artificial intelligence. And we have a PhD student, or not student, person who's experienced in this space. So some of the challenges that we've just been talking about, we're actually also trying to validate some of the anomalies that might come out so that the user doesn't experience, any, as you say, how would you know when somebody goes out and back, you can't remember how many cars went past you, or the wind was gusting, or whatever it whatever it might be.
Yes.
But the software will say, okay, that's a good test. That's an incomplete test. So therefore, I wouldn't necessarily use that as your baseline number.
And just to give our viewers some expectation, we have used this test a few times, testing them in the open road, and from our user experience, doing the test with the correct protocol is important. Pacing the test correctly is important, and then learning how to use Golden Cheetah, which is a special edition of Golden Cheetah with Notio Konect, it's another thing that is required. So you need a power meter, you need speed sensors built in on the bike, not the GPS power speed sensor, but you need an N+ speed sensor on the bike. And then we need to learn how to use Golden Cheetah Notio edition in order to compute and to get our aerodynamics reading. So even though this has been packaged to a much smaller package, there are still speed bumps and hoops that we need to jump through to learn and to make sense of the data that we collected here. Would that be fair, Ed?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that again is a journey we're on. Since I started using the product, to get data out of it, we've improved that experience exponentially. And that's just going to continue because we know, and as I said, I've been in, the technology industry a long time. So, that was that's a core mission for us to try and make it as user friendly as possible. But just bear in mind where we started from. So, you know, this difficult subject, if you think of what we're trying to package here, you go to a wind tunnel or you go to a track and they've got all these sensors and people to do it. We're trying to package that into something like you've, you know, the device you've shown, and provide a software experience. So, you know, we are on a journey, and as I said, we're striving. And, you know, there's new updates for the app, the device. You know, we release that on a regular basis. So we never, ever stand still. So
cool. I mean, as a user, I had some struggles and frustrations. And I always find that going to the online help desk to be very helpful. You know, your company has gotten back to us within a very reasonable time frame and help us narrow down our issues and move forward. So that's been cool. I would like to show you, I've been hearing, I want to show this picture, Ed, about your product in World Tour teams. I found this picture online and I just want to let you comment on it, and let me put this right up. So Alejandro Valverde with your product in a velodrome. So what is that about, Ed?
I guess he's probably trying to find more speed, right? So World Tour rider still searching for speed, and so I think so. We're about to announce we've got contracts with 2 World Tour teams, so we've got some relations, and then that's back to our heritage, because obviously Argon has always done that for triathlon, working with some top athletes, and also with World Tour. And obviously for Notio, it's the same thing, because, you know, again, what happens, they're pushing the boundary. But obviously in that case, I'd imagine he's trying to find. I think that the text is talking about being a rainy day in Mallorca, I think. So he's putting it to good use.
Well, can you spill the beans about the World Tour teams that you will be working with? Are you allowed to say anything about that?
Not yet. Watch this space. Very, very close. So some very interesting teams to be working with.
Yes.
And it is. You know, as for us, it's about learning. It's a partnership, right? So yes, it's great that they're choosing to use our product to help them, but more importantly, we try and work with them on a partnership. And you know, we're always seeking to try and find that next performance game.
It's very interesting because we are seeing that seasoned pros like Valverde and Dumoulin and all these professionals, every season they are trying to improve themselves. You know, so if they are pushing that boundary and that envelope, and so should we, because I believe that there are more gains to be made amongst amateurs, because we have not maxed out, whether it is training or it is a riding position. We have not really pushed that very hard. Now, since we're talking about World Tour, I would like to Dan Bingham from Huub Wattbike team has on his social media account talked about his work with Jumbo Visma, and they were doing some aero testing with your device, and that gave them the famous team time trial win at Tour de France 2019. And can you talk to us about that? You know, how did Dan using the aero sensors, working with Jumbo Visma, what sort of work did they do? What kind of gains did they get? Can you talk about that?
Sure. So last year at the Science and Cycling Congress, we presented some work that it was Dan who presented it, obviously, because he did the work, and obviously the device. So here you go. So the challenge here was, Wout van Aert, who is a cyclocross rider, but obviously a very good road rider. They needed to do some testing, but they were at altitude before the Tour de France. And it's really difficult to test, in those environments, because they're typically not flat. And then also he would have had to travel away from the camp which would lose the benefit of the altitude. So they said, well, actually, why don't we take the Notio to altitude and find a way? And that's why Dan is there, because obviously he's got the skill set to set up a protocol to actually do it. And that's what they did, a 4-kilometer downhill main road. But the sensor is on the bike, giving him the data so he can make the objective view. Okay, let's go and change that, right? Let's find out what the difference between run A and run B and run C and run D. And as you can see, we don't know. Well, I do know what the CDA number, but I can't tell you what it is. But obviously, it was significant enough for Wout to win the Dauphiné TT and obviously the Belgian National Championships. And unfortunately, his accident in the Tour, we didn't get to see any more performances last year. But that's a really good example of saying, okay, and just remember, it's a tool. And obviously, we still need coaches and we still need people to help. And in this context, in a world tour, they obviously have the ability to do that. But it was the convenience. I can take it, put it on the bike, and I can find the gains. And as I said, that was quite a technical protocol for them to do, and lots of shuttling up and down the hill. So, but the results are real. And would they have found that necessarily? Would they, if they had gone to the velodrome? Yes, they would. But it was the convenience and the fact that he was, so many weeks out from the, some of the most important races of the year. And that's one of the other challenges with World Tour is that the riders this year have been quite lucky because they've had downtime due to COVID. But normally it's very, very difficult to get time with the riders. They test in December, they test in January, then they go to the races. And one of the other things that we found is that, and this is at World Tour, right? So we're not talking about, general riding or amateur level, but at World Tour level, they sometimes go to the wind tunnel, they go to the velodrome, they get a CDA number, and everybody thinks, wow, that's really good. My CDA is 0.19, 0.214. I'm going to rock this time trial when I go to the Tour de France or the Giro. And surprise, surprise, some of the riders get really frustrated because they're not achieving the calculated potential from that.
And what
a
is
lot
that?
of that. So what we find is that, you can see the rider when they do the test, right? They're what we call, the test etiquette is really good. They're really silent. They're good on the bike. They get that number and they go, right, job done. The problem is when they take that outside in the real world, it doesn't always transfer to the real world, because when you're in the midst of a race, 3-week Grand Tour, you hit week 2, you're fatigued, you're expected to do what you did in January when you were nice and rested and you were going around the velodrome. It doesn't work like that. So there's always that trade-off. But of course, now with some of the teams that we're working with, they have the device when they're training, and that's the difference.
Yes.
So, and this is the same for some triathletes, and they're realizing that actually I want to know what my CDA is when I'm doing a training effort. Am I adhering to my position? Am I actually still, so if I've got a CDA target, just like I have a power target, and I'm trying to hit that target in training, and I know I can repeat that.
Yes.
Because, it's like when you're coaching somebody, and obviously we've got 20-minute power, we've got 5-minute power, and you see somebody make a breakthrough. Sometimes a breakthrough happens in a test, it happens in a race, and then the next question is, how repeatable is that?
Yes.
Has it really, really, been ingrained in the physiology? Can I actually still maintain that? And some people will peak, and then they'll come away from from that. So I think the important thing is to try and, and this is why we say the device testing and training. They're the two pieces that you can bring to it. So, because a couple of examples, people in the UK are racing, and again, there's the UCI have not got a specific category to say you can put this type of device on your bike. There are some rules and regulations. So I'm not suggesting that, you go out and put it on the bike. You need to check with the relevant authorities and all that kind of stuff. But some amateur events in the UK, people have used it. And what's happened is typically towards the end of a time trial, 25 miles in the UK or 10 miles, the rider is obviously going. They're not going at tempo pace, right? Zone 2. They're going, fast.
Full gas.
Full gas, exactly. And you get fatigued.
Full
and
gas.
The point is, if you have the device to tell you, actually, you know what, my CDA is starting to go up a little bit because my shoulders and my head, and I'm starting to move around a little bit. And there's many famous cases at World Tour level where, the margins now are too tight to give away And if you drop 35 seconds on week 2, you've got to find that 35 seconds somewhere.
True.
So why give it away? And that's my point. And that's why these teams are doing it now, and they're starting to say, okay, let's use the device not just for testing but for training.
Exactly.
So, and that's
just as we don't use the power meter just for testing, we should use it in training too, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
And just as a power number is dynamic, our 5-minute power is dynamic, our 20-minute power is dynamic, so is our CDA. Just because we tested 300 watts 2 months ago, it doesn't mean that we're going to do 300 watts in a race 2 months later.
Correct.
Temperature is different, our periodization is different, our fatigue level is different. And you make a very good point about being silent on the bike. So if we tested CDA 0.18, really cool in the wind tunnel, we were really in the zone and we could nail it out. But on a race day, we might not be recording with the same bike setup, with the same equipment, everything being the same. It doesn't mean that we are going to clock the same kind of CDA, isn't it? Because there is the human rider that is involved. The bike has not changed, but the rider might have. Mentally, if we are nervous, if we are, oh God, my God, I'm 60 seconds behind, I need to gain that time to win the GC, the anxiety kicking in, we might be getting a different kind of reading, isn't it, Ed?
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that you see as well with riders is that they, we were working with some riders earlier in the year when there was some racing. And there was 8 seconds of a deficit. I won't give it away because it's not fair. But I was watching remotely, and I was speaking to somebody in the team car following the rider. And within the first 4 kilometers, I was able to say to them, "The 8 seconds is gone." Because the rider had come off the start ramp, got into their position, and literally within 4 kilometers, it was press the pedal super, super hard. And I said to the person I work with at the team, I said, they're not complying to the position.
Yes.
It's quite simple. They're not complying to the position, and they're giving away seconds. And sure enough, they gave it away, and they lost. They didn't get on the podium. Yeah. And there's lots of examples like that. And to the riders, it's quite difficult because, of course, they say, well, actually, what do I actually need to do that? Because yes, professional riders have got lots of experience, and we know, I completely agree where they might go on feel as opposed to just driving by a number. That's absolutely fine. But when it comes to aerodynamics, a feeling is quite difficult to determine whether you're aero or not. So, because of course you can't look at yourself while you're riding. You can feel the sensation in your legs, your heart and lungs, but you can't look at the body shape. So, and all it takes at that level, you just cannot give away 8-10 seconds because of that. And that's what we're seeing now. And even in a triathlon context, it's exactly the same. You want to do a sub 10-hour Ironman, which is no mean feat, then, your biggest potential for gain is obviously you can technically swim better. On the TT section of the bike section of the triathlon, you could gain a huge amount, not necessarily by going faster, but maybe by increasing your efficiency. Yes. So precisely. Because you've got to run. Yeah. So that's the other important thing.
Yeah. And 2 weeks ago when we spoke to John Beasley on the same show, and he was talking about finding gains, not just from the physiologically, that means getting more power output from the athlete. We are also trying to find efficiency, aerodynamics, and all this. So it is not just physiology and nothing else. I was listening to a podcast where a top 3 finisher in Kona shaved 15 minutes off his cycling time because of a change in aero positioning. So these kind of gains are definitely real. Now, I would like to, if you guys are tuning in for the first time, if you have been watching this, if you enjoy this show, I would like to encourage you to consider subscribing to our channel so that you'll be notified every time we have a new video being put out, and it will be a big support to our channel and to the stuff we're doing here. Now, Ed, I have some questions that is being put forth from some of the viewers here. I would like to put it up here so that we can address them. Oops. Okay, one more time. How is data collected from the upstream related to the bike rider aerodynamics, since the data has yet to slip past and interact with the bike rider? I think what it's trying to say here is that you are putting the pedometer in front of the bike, whereas the airstream has not passed through the entire bike and the entire cyclist. How is it possible to collect that data and to think that it is accurate? Would you like to address that, Ed?
Yeah, sure. So basically what we've got is, so there's a couple of things there. So we have a power meter so we can tell what power is being produced. We've got the wind speed. So we're making a calculation based on those three things, right? And then the second thing is that the system, when you first calibrate it, will will estimate what we call the calibration factor, because everybody's different. So the first thing is we're estimating what the mass of the rider and the bike, to try and, in effect, push through the air. So by estimating what that, or calculating what that is, and then taking the other data, the power, the speed. So we're not using a specific calculation that we use. It's a standard method of working out what the coefficient drag is. So, in the future, for sure, and as I said earlier, we'd like to have more sensors, but how practical is that? So, by using these core metrics, and obviously there's a little bit more in terms of slope and altitude and stuff like that, but ultimately what we're trying to do is, take that. But the important thing is that, and to answer the question, we do put a calibration factor on the rider to make that more accurate. So I hope that answers the question. So, but if not, feel free to get in touch and we can get some more questions.
Sure. So guys, thank you very much for posting questions. Keep the questions coming in. Get busy in the comment box. Type away. If you're on YouTube, type away on your phone in the comment box so that we can pick up those questions that you are interested in. Now, Ramlan from Singapore has a very good question. Let me put it up here. Hey Ramlan, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us again. Ramlan's question: what are the challenges for coach athlete to participate and adopt this technology?
So again, what we've done is we've, with the device and the app together, we've tried to build a lot of features that allow the coach to become, and the rider to become, more informed as to how to do that. So we're not expecting you to try and have a degree in aerodynamics, an understanding. And at the end of the day, it's like, I remember when I first got a power meter, I got a power tap, I had a yellow head unit. And when I first switched it on and I started pedaling my bike, the number was going all over the place. It was like, what is this? I'm going to send it back. I don't want it. And then eventually, we had normalized power, averaging power. And then eventually Garmin, when they, and some of the head unit device, or the head units that were out there, you were able to pair that. So we're a little bit ahead of that, but we're still, if I make that comparison. And I think, for us, the most important thing is to try and bring that user experience via the app, and for those people who have been using the product very early on, the advances we've made around that. And we've just released a new Garmin IQ app, for instance, and you can see on your Garmin head unit the CDA, the wind, and then we've just added things like what the last lap CDA was. We'll eventually add what your current average CDA for that lap is. So it's we're always adding and trying to make that experience. So back to the question, it's about making the process as simple as possible. Yeah. But at the back end, it's still doing a lot of the work for you, right? Yeah. So
Ed, would it be fair to say that learning to work with CDA is like learning to work with a power meter? Like when riders, blow out in the first 2 minutes, way past the red zone, and then they paid a penalty at the end of a 10-minute effort or 20-minute effort, and then they learn, okay, now I do not want to go past the red line. I want to ride at my threshold, and then try to average out the power, and then they find that, hey, I'm actually achieving better time. So when if people can learn that from using a power meter, I bet they can learn the same from using aerodynamic sensors. We have done some tests over here.
Yeah.
And we did 3 runs, and then I would talk to the rider, hey, your second run, the CDA was like 5-6% higher. Do you remember what you did on the bike? So yeah, I was shifting a little bit more. I wasn't really comfortable on the bike. So we are making that correlation. What did I do on the bike, and what happened to the data? And when they can put the two things together, that I think would be what is invaluable learning experience for the rider.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that's going to come as well is we already do it. So some of the teams and some of the the track teams do it. They look at watt to CDA. So they look at that relationship, and you maximize the amount of power you can put out for the demand of the event you're doing. And then you want to maximize and sort of make your CDA as efficient. So there's a relationship between those two numbers.
Yes, it's not just CDA, it's not just power.
Don't separate them, because look at both together. And that's why for us, eventually the software you'll be able to analyze in the normal everyday platforms like Training Peaks, etc. But it's not there right now because there's not enough devices out there. So when more devices come to market, those guys will add these metrics and start to do stuff. So it's a chicken and an egg situation. Sure. But the other thing I was going to say is that we work with Dr. Steve Faulkner of Nottingham Trent University in the UK, and one of the interesting things that's come about, and this sort of helps in this coach-athlete pursuit, right? Because the big question we get asked is, so I can get my CDA, I know what power I'm doing, but how do I make improvements, and why is this really, really important? So the research that they've done at the university, they've started to look at the relationship between the angle of the torso on the bike, and we all know that typically what people do is they say, well, what you've got to do is slam your stem or slam your front end and get really, really flat back. That's the that's the sort of approach you want to take. And what they found is, and the research hasn't been published in the full. You can see the abstract online, so you can get a picture as to what they're talking about. But this is really, really interesting because at that university they're combining an engineering problem and a physiology problem, because the issue is when you go too low, the rider sometimes, and again there's an optimum angle for the torso that actually you produce less power, you might be more aerodynamic, but the problem is you think my CDA is lower, okay, I'm not putting out as much power and I'm not going faster, okay, there must be something else. What they've discovered over I think 12-18 months of research, by getting lots of athletes to lower the torso angle and lots of measuring, they also got the athletes, when they were doing the test, to ingest a heat pill where they could tell the temperature. And what they found was when the rider went too low, sometimes some riders started to produce more heat, which had the actual potential for a drop in power. Yeah,
and so you're overheating the engine.
But the thing is, there was two reasons for that. And of course, when you're flat, you've got a flat back, and the air is coming at you. It's just going around you. It's not actually hitting your chest. So it would explain, and maybe for listeners who are living in a lot warmer and more humid climate than
where we are right now. Yeah.
So don't always say. And then of course the question is, well, what's my optimum? Well, if you test, you find out, because that if you go from, let's say the optimum for you is 12 degrees, but actually you might be able to go to 10 degrees and be faster. So we're already seeing things like that, and that's science-based research that tells us. And Steve's got a pedigree in producing some interesting technology. He's also the guy who developed the warm-up pants that you see for athletes at the Olympics. So 2012 in London was where they first were introduced. So he's developed some pretty clever technology. So his background obviously is understanding what happens to the body. So of course that question right there, and people are going, actually that makes sense, because when I went really low, I used to get really, really hot and I overheat. And we
Yes.
know what happens to some riders when they overheat. The
Yeah.
power goes.
It's like having a vehicle and you block off the air intake to the engine.
Correct. Absolutely.
So it's the same principle. Now I have a couple of more questions to ask from the viewers, and then I have a final question here. So let's go through that. Glenn from New Zealand, is it possible to input specific data to help the calibration input, such as body weight, height, etc.? We do need
Yes.
to key that into the app, isn't it? The
Correct.
height,
Absolutely.
the
You
weight.
can put that. Yep. Yeah. You input that those parameters on the device, of course. So, and then also on the analysis software in Golden Cheetah.
Yes.
Even if you've made a mistake, things like you didn't quite get everything on, you can still make adjustments afterwards. So it's not wasted. So you can put those parameters. Rolling resistance you can change.
Yes.
If you already know your CDA from a test that you've done on the track or the velodrome, you can put that into the device as your baseline as well. So it allows you to do that quite easily.
Okay. And then we have another question. Chan Jun Shen. Hey Chan, welcome to the channel. Good to see you here. The pitot tube. He is saying that we have put it mostly, not at the front end, most front end of the aero bar. With airplanes, it's typically at the nearest front of the aircraft. But on a bike, we are not putting it there. Does that affect our reading? Because what you want is the undisturbed airflow.
That's absolutely correct, and I think the important thing is to try and it depends on the bike, and we supply the mount to put on the extension bars, and then you can there are some other mounting that you can get if you want to. It depends on the bike, right? And every bike and the bars are different, but you want to try and have it as far forward as you can. So the question is absolutely valid. And obviously you do as much as you can to get it as far forward as you can. But then again, bear in mind, we're not relying completely on that, because as I said earlier, even in the software, we try and detect any issue that might come up with regards to some of these things. But yes, as far forward as you can. And then to the question on the pitot tube, we could potentially have a longer one, but again, it's back to we did have a longer one at the beginning, ironically, and what we found was what we wanted was, and that's quite a high cost, if you like, in terms of our device. So what we wanted was the minimum we could get away with on the variety of positions. Bear in mind, we're a bike manufacturer, or we're owned by a bike manufacturer, so we know a good variety of shapes and sizes that can happen on the front of the bike. So we obviously do our own calculations and research around fluid dynamics and all that kind of stuff to try and find what the optimum is. So in an ideal world, as I said earlier, you would want to have 5 or 6 of these on the bike, but who wants to put 5 or 6 on the bike? So if we were looking for absolute gold standard, lab-based technique, but as we well know, it's very difficult to go and put that stuff all over a bicycle. So it's an engineering challenge to do it. So that's how we've ended up where we are. We've chosen a pitot that's long enough to get good data and accurate data, but then obviously it's also got to be positioned. And as I said, there's a variety of things you can do to make sure it sits further forward on the on the bars as possible.
Good stuff. Now, my last question for you, Ed. Now, if I'm a listener watching this, and I'm convinced aerodynamics is going to help my performance, I'm a triathlete, I'm a road cyclist, what would you suggest I do next?
So I think obviously buy one, but there's lots of things. There's lots of things that you can do, and I think some of the things I've already talked about might resonate with viewers in terms of you might have think actually I was looking and I went and did adjustments to my bike and I went really low and I found that the power wasn't as high. So looking at your data in terms of the output when you've made changes, that's one obvious thing to do. And we know that there's a difference. We see a difference between people riding a road bike and riding a TT bike. They sometimes say, why can I not produce the same amount of power? The other thing I always suggest, and this is obviously from a Notio and a coaching perspective, but depending on the riding you're doing, but if you're a triathlete, for instance, and you want to improve, sometimes more training time in an adapt, or if you've made a change to the position, more time in that position is actually more beneficial than anything else, because your body takes time to adapt.
Yes.
So they're the kind of things that you can, and there's lots and lots of different things that you can look at in terms of your position, your shoulders, your head, etc. And unfortunately, there's no simple answer to say do this and you will get faster, because it's about what you can sustain. Can you still put the power out that you need to produce the results that you're expecting?
Yes.
So that's why it becomes, and I don't want to say it's complicated, because it's not, but you kind of have to systematically go through those changes. And then the other thing is, when you do testing, whether it's with our product or you just test yourself, it's important to have, the same sort of environment that you're testing in, so you can sort of have a reference to go back to and try and build from, rather than trying to, okay, I'm going to test here and I'm going to test there. You kind of have to, no different to you doing fitness testing. You're doing it normally in the same place, the same hill or whatever it might be. You kind of need to do the same here with aero testing.
Fantastic. Now, if you guys are interested in getting one of these aero sensors, it is available online at notio.ai. I'm going to put the link in the description box below. You can click on here and you'll be able to access and buy your sensors. And if you're interested in doing more testing, we can do that for you as well. We can explore doing that. Now, Ed, please stick around. I really appreciate that for you to spend time with us. It's very generous of you. I just want to walk the audience. If you can stick around, I just want to make further announcement about what's happening next week. Now, next week we're going to have we're going to talk about the winning formula. Teamwork makes dream work. We'll be talking to Chi Li Ming and also Isham. Both of them are sports scientists from the Sports Institute of Malaysia, who are working behind the scene with the Malaysian Olympic track cycling team. And we'll be talking to them what are the things that they do behind the scene to give us technological and scientific gains for our athletes. So thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. It's been great fun talking to you. And once again, subscribe to the channel, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell button, and this will be a big help to our team, to the channel that I'm working on. If you like the content and the interview that we have just conducted, hit the like button as well. So thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. I will be seeing you next week. And at the meantime, train smarter, go faster. All the best, guys. Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks. Let me see.